Right now in South Korea, you are witnessing a scene that looks less like a modern society and more like a slow-motion train wreck involving millions of people, some very expensive designer handbags, and a whole lot of silicone. Imagine walking into a room where everyone is screaming at each other about a plastic doll, while the actual building they are standing in is literally crumbling to the ground because no one is having babies anymore. It sounds like the plot of a weird, dark comedy, right? But for the young people living there, this is a daily reality. The whole country is currently caught in a massive rupture of the social contract that used to keep everything running. For decades, there was a simple, unwritten deal. Men worked themselves to death to provide a high-status life and a fancy apartment, and in exchange, they got a family and a partner to carry on the family name. But that gear has finally snapped off the machine. Today, millions of young men are just looking at the price tag of that deal and saying, "No thanks, I would rather just play video games and stay single." And this choice, it has triggered a level of collective panic that is hard to describe unless you see the digital battlefields where it plays out every single day. You might be asking yourself, why on earth would anyone get so angry about someone else deciding to stay single? Well, it all comes down to a very specific, very aggressive form of protectionism. When a man in Korea decides he is done with the local dating scene and announces he is going to marry someone from another country, like Japan or Southeast Asia, the internet basically explodes. These men aren't met with a shrug or a good for you. Instead, they are hit with a tidal wave of insults. They get labeled with names like leftovers or biological waste. People post comments saying they are failures who had to buy a wife, and they even curse the new couple, saying the bride will run away the second she gets her legal papers. It is not just mean-spirited chatter, it is a defensive wall. It is a monopoly trying to protect its territory. But wait, it gets even weirder. This tension reached a boiling point over something as simple as a doll. Not just any doll, but those life-sized silicone figures. After years of legal fighting, the Supreme Court finally stepped in and said the government cannot tell grown adults what kind of figures they can have in their own homes. You would think that would be the end of it, but the backlash was insane. Activist groups started claiming that owning a plastic doll was a threat to human dignity and a practice run for violence. But let's be real here. If you look past the big words, the truth is much simpler. That doll is a competitor. It is a competitor that doesn't demand a six-figure salary, doesn't care if you don't live in a luxury apartment in the middle of Seoul, and doesn't start an argument about your social status every night. The market for human companionship has become so expensive and so high risk that men are literally preferring inanimate objects and international flights over the local options. It is a moment in history where a human group is being outperformed by a combination of technology and a passport. So, why would anyone actually demand such an impossible price for a relationship? Why has the entry bar for marriage become so high that almost no one can clear it? If you look at the raw human drive behind this, it is pure market logic. In this society, marriage isn't just about love, it has been the primary way for people to move up the social ladder. By setting the price of admission at the absolute maximum, demanding a top-tier career, a massive bank account, and a lifetime of financial surrender, the local dating market started acting like a luxury cartel. They created a high-end club where only the top earners were allowed to play. But here is the problem with a cartel: it only works if you have a captive audience. When men started looking across the border for partners who were more appreciative and less demanding, they weren't just going on a date, they were breaking the monopoly. They were practicing international trade in a market that was supposed to be closed. And when you devalue a local product by showing there is a better, cheaper alternative elsewhere, the people running the cartel lose their leverage. That is why the shaming is so intense. They are trying to bully the customers back into a market they can no longer afford. But then you have to wonder, what about the culture itself? Doesn't the society see how crazy this is getting? That is where the deep-seated irony comes in. South Korea is this strange place where you have the most advanced technology in the world, but the social rules are still stuck in a very old, very rigid mindset that has been twisted for the digital age. It is a country where the state acts like a national parent. Adult websites are blocked by a government firewall as if everyone is still a child. They talk about purity and dignity all day long. But here is the funny part. While they are busy banning dolls and shaming men for looking abroad, they turn a completely blind eye to other things. There is a massive subculture where people write incredibly explicit and often non-consensual stories about real-life male celebrities. It is a total double standard. They claim to protect dignity when it involves a plastic figure, but when it involves the privacy and image of real men being used for digital fantasies, the legal system suddenly has nothing to say. It is a site-specific brand of madness where the government bans the consumption of intimacy but effectively subsidizes the people who are walking away from it. Now you might ask, what happens when you keep pushing people like this? What happens when the rules only seem to apply to one side? Well, the system starts to rot from the inside. Take the military service, for example. Every young man has to give up 2 years of his life for almost no pay, totally losing his momentum in his career and his education. It is a huge sacrifice. For a long time, there were small ways to say thank you, like a little extra credit on a job exam. But that was taken away because people argued it was unfair. Even something as small as a coffee shop offering a free drink to a soldier has been met with organized boycotts. Imagine that. A guy is literally putting his life on the line to guard the border, and people get angry because he got a free cup of coffee. When you remove every single incentive for participating in the social contract, why would anyone stay? If you are expected to sacrifice your youth, give away all your money, and get shamed for your hobbies, the only logical move is to leave the game entirely. And that is exactly what they are doing. They are becoming ghosts. They work just enough to survive, they pay as little tax as possible, and they find their happiness in places where the local social pressure can't reach them. So, what happened when the activists and the status seekers got exactly what they asked for? What happened when they pushed their demands so far that the other side finally just gave up? The result is a demographic apocalypse. The country now has the lowest birth rate on the planet. It is not just a dip, it is a total collapse. The youth have effectively gone on a general strike against the future. You have movements on one side saying no marriage, no sex, and no children, and movements on the other side saying they are just going their own way. The trust between people has been burned to a crisp. And the weirdest part is how the government responds. They spend billions and billions of dollars trying to fix the birth rate, but they won't address the toxic social climate. They are trying to buy their way out of a problem that is actually about how people treat each other. It is a preview of the future for any society that gets too obsessed with status and competition. This is what happens when a country becomes a giant office building where everyone is competing for a corner suite, but no one wants to go home to an empty house. If this keeps going, where does it all end? Imagine the future in a few decades. You will see these massive, shiny apartment buildings in the heart of the city, but they will be filled with single people who have spent their entire lives at war with each other. On one floor, you will have groups of elderly women living together in a commune because they have no families to take care of them. And on the floor right below them, you will have elderly men who have spent their whole lives in virtual reality, with the latest eye droids taking care of their every need. These two groups will be living inches apart, separated only by a ceiling, and yet they will be worlds away, still holding on to the resentment they built up in their 20s. The government will probably have to invent new taxes just to keep the lights on, while the last generation of humans slowly fades away. It is a future that is technically perfect but biologically dead. The whole thing can be summed up by a single image, a luxury purse sitting in a completely empty room. For years, the idea was that if you could just get enough status, if you could just buy the right things and keep your market value high, you would be rewarded with someone who would pay for it all. That was the dream, but because the price was set so high, the customers just stopped coming. They walked out of the store. Now you have a whole generation holding on to their high standards like a designer badge, but the room is empty. The lights are off, everyone else is at a different party in a different country, or they are happy at home with their computer and their silicon companion. A monopoly only works if people have to buy what you are selling. The second they realize they can live without it, the power is gone. In the end, it is a tragedy of pride. Both sides have spent so much time and energy building up this wall of anger that they can't afford to tear it down now. They would rather grow old alone in a quiet apartment, clinging to their sense of being right, than admit that the game they were playing was rigged from day one. It is a deep, ironic mockery of the human ego. People are choosing a lonely, plastic silence over the difficult, messy, and humble work of actually connecting with another person. They valued the price of the relationship more than the human being in it, and now they are finding out exactly what that price costs: everything. Fuel the truth at Dating in Korea. Support the structure. Stay safe in the lounge.